She was surrounded by enemies inside her own empire. No phone, no escape. And the only person who could read her silent cry for help was a maintenance worker most people didn't even know by name. What happens next will remind you that courage doesn't come with a title. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Follow the channel so you don't miss a single part. Now let's begin. The Crown Meridian wasn't just a hotel. It was a monument. 42 floors of glass and steel rising above the waterfront, its lobby ceiling vaulted high enough to make a person feel genuinely small standing beneath it, which Logan Mercer had come to believe was entirely intentional. Hotels like this one didn't just want guests to feel welcome, they wanted guests to feel grateful. There was a difference, and Logan had spent 4 years learning exactly where that line was drawn. He crouched in the utility corridor behind the third-floor kitchen, his flashlight aimed at a section of copper piping that had no business sweating the way it was. The corridor was narrow, barely wide enough to turn around in, and it smelled like cleaning solution and old insulation. Somewhere above him, 300 guests were sleeping in $1,200 rooms. Somewhere below him, the night kitchen crew was running a full prep for the morning service. And in between all of it, this pipe was quietly losing pressure in a way that, if ignored another 48 hours, was going to flood the linen storage room and cost the property about $60,000 in damage. He pressed 2 fingers against the fitting, felt the faint vibration of water pushing through a seal that wasn't holding anymore, and wrote in his notebook, Bay 3F-09, cold supply. Replace compression fitting, schedule Thursday. He'd started keeping the notebook 2 years ago because the digital work order system kept crashing and he'd gotten tired of losing notes. His supervisor before him had relied entirely on memory and institutional knowledge passed down like folklore. That supervisor had also, eventually, missed a gas leak in the East Wing mechanical room that evacuated 2 floors and made the evening news. Logan wasn't interested in making the evening news. He clicked off the flashlight, tucked the notebook into his chest pocket, and started back toward the service elevator. It was a Tuesday in late October, 6:14 in the morning, and by Logan's count, he'd already been on property for 3 hours. He'd come in early because of a drain issue in the ballroom that had been reported the night before, spent 40 minutes on that, then caught 2 other things on his way through the building that weren't on any work order because they hadn't been reported yet. That was the part of the job nobody fully understood. You didn't just fix what broke. You watched everything, all the time, looking for the thing that was about to break. Owen had asked him once what maintenance supervisors actually did. Logan had thought about it for a second, then said, "We keep everything from falling apart." Owen had signed back, like dads. That kid was going to kill him someday. But Logan parked his truck in the employee lot at 6:51 and sat for a moment before getting out. The sky was doing that thing it sometimes did in late fall, that specific shade of cold gray that wasn't quite overcast but wasn't clear either, like the day hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. He had 2 thermoses on the passenger seat. One was his, one was Owen's. He'd already dropped Owen at school by the time he got the early call in, so the second thermos had just been sitting there all morning, full of the hot chocolate he'd made at 5 a.m., while Owen ate toast and watched something on his tablet with the captions on. Owen was 8, profoundly deaf since birth, calm about it in a way that Logan sometimes found humbling and sometimes found heartbreaking in equal measure. He'd grown up watching his father learn sign language from scratch, badly at first, with the vocabulary of someone trying to navigate a foreign country using only a phrasebook, then better, then fluent enough that Owen had stopped making the face he used to make when Logan signed something wrong. They had their own shorthand now. Things they didn't need to spell out anymore. A look, a specific tilt of the head, a half sign that collapsed 3 words into a single gesture because they'd used it so many times it didn't need the full shape anymore. Logan thought about that sometimes. How language between 2 people who knew each other well enough stopped being language and became something else, something faster and quieter and more specific than words. He grabbed his thermos, left Owens on the seat, and got out of the truck. Okay. The morning briefing for the facilities team was at 7 sharp in the back office off the loading dock. 6 people, folding chairs, a whiteboard with a rough breakdown of the day's priorities. Logan ran it the way he ran everything, without wasting anyone's time. Kitchen exhaust fan on 18 is making a grinding sound. Bearings, probably. Parts are ordered, should be here Thursday. Do not let anyone submit a repair request through the main system because it'll just duplicate the work order and I'll spend an hour on the phone with IT again. He looked at Marcus, who was the newest member of his team and still had a tendency to follow every procedure by the book, even when the book was broken. Marcus? That means you specifically. Marcus held up both hands. Understood. Third floor cold supply fitting needs replacement. That's Thursday, too, before it becomes an emergency. He moved through the rest of the list. A lobby restroom fixture, 2-room HVAC units with airflow complaints, a freight elevator door sensor that was getting sticky. Anything I missed? Delia, who'd been with the hotel longer than Logan and had a particular gift for knowing what was happening in every part of the building without appearing to pay attention, said, "They're setting up the Pemberton conference suite for something this afternoon. I don't know what, but they pulled 6 chairs from storage and someone from the executive office came down personally to check the AV setup." Logan looked at her. "Which someone from the executive office?" "Hargrove's assistant. He wrote Pemberton AV on the whiteboard and circled it. I'll check the system myself before noon. Anything else?" There wasn't. People dispersed, and Logan poured the last of his thermos into a paper cup and stood at the whiteboard a moment longer, looking at the day's list. It was a normal day's list. Maintenance. Repairs. The quiet, unglamorous work of keeping a 42-floor building functional for the people who never thought about what made it function. He crossed out kitchen drain ballroom, already done, and started toward the elevator. He first heard Isabella Vaughn's name in the context of the hotel about 3 months after he started working there. She was by then already something of a figure in the property. Not a daily presence, not someone who walked the floors, but a presence in the way that ownership is a presence, felt in the decisions and the standards and the particular intensity with which certain executives spoke when they mentioned her name. She owned the Crown Meridian the way a person owns something they built rather than inherited. The Vaughn Hospitality Group had started as a single mid-range property in a mid-sized city, and Isabella had spent the better part of a decade turning it into something that now had properties in 11 cities and a reputation that made certain competitors openly uncomfortable. Logan had read about her once in a magazine someone left in the facilities office, a profile piece that included a photograph of her standing in front of one of her properties in a way that looked genuinely unself-conscious, like she hadn't noticed the photographer, which he suspected meant she'd noticed the photographer and decided not to perform for them. He'd formed no particular opinion of her. In his experience, the people who owned places like this were either present in ways that made everything slightly worse or absent in ways that everyone preferred. He'd put Isabella in the absent category and hadn't thought much more about it. That changed on a Wednesday in late October when she walked through the Crown Meridian's lobby at 2:17 in the afternoon, and every executive on the property seemed to become approximately 30% more tense within 60 seconds of her arrival. Logan noticed this because he was standing near the concierge desk, reviewing a punch list with Delia, and the lobby energy shifted in a way that was physically palpable. Not panic. Something more specific than that. The particular tension of people who'd been caught slightly off guard by something they thought they had more time to prepare for. She was shorter than he'd expected from the photograph. She moved with the kind of confidence that wasn't performed. No extra stillness, no deliberate pace. Just a person who knew exactly where she was going and didn't need to signal that she knew. Her coat was wet at the shoulders, which meant she'd come in from the rain without stopping to deal with it. She was talking on her phone. She did not look at the lobby decor or the flower arrangements or any of the things hotels put in lobbies specifically to be looked at. She ended the call, put the phone in her coat pocket, and spoke directly to the man at her side. Richard Hargrove, the hotel's general manager, a man Logan found professionally adequate and personally difficult. "Where's the conference room?" "Pemberton Suite, 41st floor. I know where the Pemberton Suite is." She was already moving toward the elevator bank. "Who's already up there?" Hargrove listed names as they crossed the lobby. Logan watched them pass, noted the way the other executives fell into formation behind them like a small current being pulled toward a larger one, and went back to his punch list. He thought, Normal Tuesday. He didn't know yet how wrong he was. He was on the 41st floor at 3:45 because he'd gone to check the AV system in the Pemberton suite before the meeting and discovered, as he sometimes did, that someone had helpfully moved a cable to a position that made no functional sense and left it there. He fixed it, tested the display screen, checked the room temperature. The climate control on this floor ran about 2 degrees cool, which he'd been fighting with facilities management about for 8 months, and was packing up his tools when he heard voices in the corridor outside. Not the normal voices of a meeting. Something was wrong with the pitch of them. Too low, too deliberate. The particular register of people choosing their words very carefully. He stood still for a moment, listening. The voices moved past the door and down toward the conference room at the end of the corridor. He caught fragments, a name, a number, the word Friday twice, the second time with an emphasis that made it sound like a deadline rather than a calendar day. He opened the door quietly and stepped into the corridor with his tool bag, which gave him a reason to be there. The corridor was empty now except for a group of 4 men in suits who'd stopped about 30 feet away, near the entrance to the main conference room. Through the glass wall panel beside the door, Logan could see several people already seated inside. And at the far end of the corridor, near the window at the end of the hall, 2 people standing. One was Hargrove, the other was Isabella Vaughn. She was standing with her back to Logan, but something about her posture was wrong. Not the way a person stood when they were having an uncomfortable conversation. Something more rigid than that, more deliberate, like she was working to keep herself contained. Hargrove was speaking. Logan couldn't hear what he was saying from this distance, but whatever it was, Isabella's right hand was flat against her thigh, and she was pressing it there. He noticed that because it looked like someone pressing a hand against a wound. He started walking toward the elevator, the natural direction from the Pemberton suite. He moved at the same pace he always moved, unhurried, purposeful, a maintenance worker going about his work. As he passed the window wall of the corridor, he glanced left toward the glass panel that looked out over the building's atrium space. The sun had come back out after the rain, and the glass was throwing long reflections across the polished floor. In the glass, things that were behind you appeared in front of you. It was one of those architectural effects that was more striking than the designers probably intended. In the glass, Logan could see Isabella Vaughn's reflection. She was watching him, not casually. She was tracking him in the glass with the careful attention of someone who couldn't risk turning around. Her hand moved, just slightly, just enough. He almost missed it, but he didn't. "Help," she signed. Just the one word, the simplest version of it. Right hand raised, palm out, a single clear statement against the glass. He kept walking. He did not stop, did not look directly at her, did not change his pace by a single half step. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. His heart was doing something loud and irregular in his chest. The elevator opened. He stepped in. He stood with his back to the door and let the numbers count down and thought, "Think. Be careful. Think." The thing about Owen's deafness that Logan had never found a way to explain to anyone who didn't already understand it was this. Learning sign language for your child isn't like learning a foreign language for travel. It's not a skill you acquire. It's a different way of paying attention. When you communicate primarily with your hands and face and body, you start reading hands and faces and bodies all the time without thinking about it. The way a person who speaks a language is always partially listening even when they're not trying to. Logan had been reading people's hands for 8 years. He knew the difference between someone who made unconscious gestures while they spoke and someone who was deliberately shaping words. He knew the difference between anxiety and fear. He had watched his son communicate around people who couldn't understand him, with teachers, with other kids, with strangers in stores. And he had learned, through Owen, how to say the most important thing in the least possible space when the window was narrow. What he'd seen in that glass wasn't ambiguous. Isabella Vaughn was a woman standing in a corridor of her own building with a senior executive she clearly didn't trust, surrounded by men she also didn't trust. And she had seen a man she didn't know and made a calculation in about 3 seconds that he was her best chance at communicating something she couldn't say out loud. She signed help because it was the most essential word, and she had about 3 seconds to use it. He didn't know yet what help meant in this situation, or what she was asking for, or what exactly was happening in that conference room. What he knew was, she'd asked, and he'd understood. and nobody else in the building had. He got out on the second floor and went to the facilities office and sat down. He thought for 7 minutes, which he knew because he watched the clock. Then he started making calls. Not police calls. Not yet. He didn't know enough, and he was aware that calling the police on the basis of a single sign seen in a corridor reflection was not going to produce the outcome the situation appeared to require. It would produce confusion, delay, and quite possibly a conversation where someone explained to him that he was a maintenance worker and should return to his duties. What he needed first was information. The Crown Meridian was, like most large hotels, a building that ran on 2 parallel systems. There was the visible system, the lobby, the guest floors, the restaurant, the conference spaces, all of it designed to present a particular face. And there was the invisible system, the maintenance corridors, the service elevators, the mechanical rooms, the spaces between walls where the cables and pipes and climate systems lived. Logan knew the invisible system better than he knew his own apartment. He'd been moving through it for 4 years. He started on the 38th floor. The Crown Meridian Security Operations Room was on 38, adjacent to the executive suite offices. A room that most people didn't know the location of and that Logan had legitimate access to because of an ongoing issue with the building's HVAC that routed through the mechanical cabinet on that floor. He'd been in and out of that corridor 6 times in the past month. The security staff knew his face. He knew their schedule. He didn't go into the security room. He went to the mechanical cabinet, unlocked it, and stood there with his tools while he listened to the conversation happening through the wall. 2 of the 3 security team members on duty that afternoon were talking about something that made Logan's neck go cold. "Doesn't leave the building tonight." Hargrove was clear. "What about the harbor access?" "Arranged. Tuesday morning, before the Harbor Authority office opens." A pause. "This is above my pay grade." "Everything's above your pay grade. That's why you don't ask questions." Logan made a note. He made a lot of notes over the next hour and a half, working his way through corridors and mechanical rooms with the methodical patience of a man who understood that the building would tell him what he needed to know if he moved through it correctly. The picture that assembled itself was not a comfortable one. He found the first piece in the security room corridor. 2 of the 3 on-duty security staff were not responding to Vaughn Hospitality Group protocols. They were responding to something else. Someone else. He found the second piece in the executive floor service corridor, where he overheard a conversation through a ventilation return that confirmed Richard Hargrove was at the center of it. Hargrove and at least 2 board members whose names Logan knew only because they appeared on the organizational chart he'd once seen on a bulletin board in the administrative office. Eastbrook. Pellman. He found the third piece in the IT equipment room on 39, where the maintenance log showed someone had installed a signal relay on the building's internal communications network 3 weeks ago. Installed by a contractor Logan had never heard of, authorized by a signature that looked like it had been authorized by nobody in particular. Someone had been preparing this for months. The emergency board meeting Isabella had been called in for wasn't an emergency. It was a setup. Whatever documents they were pressing her to sign, whatever transfer of authority they'd engineered, it was the culmination of something that had been built slowly and carefully by people who knew the company well enough to know exactly where its pressure points were. And the security team was with them, which meant that calling for help through normal channels was not safe. Logan went back to the facilities office, sat down, and looked at his notes. He thought about Owen, who had once asked him, "What do you do when something is scary?" Logan had signed back, "You do the next thing. Just the next thing." He picked up his phone and called Delia. "I need to know something," he said when she picked up, "and I need you not to ask me why." A pause. "That's not a comfortable sentence, Logan." "No, it isn't." Another pause, shorter. "Ask. Hargrove locked down any building exit protocols today? Service exits, freight loading, parking access?" He heard her moving, heard the sound of her checking something. "Freight elevators on a manual key override, loading dock door. Yeah, it's showing a manual hold, authorized 3 hours ago." She paused. "That's unusual." "It is." "What's happening?" "I don't know enough yet. Don't tell anyone I asked." He stopped. "Especially not anyone from executive." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you in trouble?" "Not yet." He thought about it. Can you get me the private number for the harbor master's office without going through the front desk system? Why do you need the harbor? She stopped. Okay, give me 10 minutes. He needed more than the harbor master's number before he could move. He needed evidence. The IT room gave him one thing. The security corridor conversation gave him something, but not enough. Overheard words in a hallway weren't going to hold up to anything. What he needed was something on record, something that existed outside his notebook and his own account of the afternoon. He went back to 39. The signal relay in the IT equipment room had been installed, as far as Logan could determine, to route certain internal communications through an external server. It was beyond his technical knowledge to fully understand the mechanism, but he understood enough to recognize that it meant recorded conversations, recorded somewhere, by someone, which meant there was a record, which meant the record existed somewhere accessible. He also knew, because he'd been doing this job for 4 years, that the building's older mechanical systems had their own recording infrastructure, not the modern network integrated systems, but the legacy setups from when the building was constructed, some of which still functioned and none of which had been incorporated into the main security network because they predated it. The legacy system for the Pemberton Suite corridor had a recording module in the mechanical room on 40. Logan had replaced a capacitor in that module 8 months ago and had noted, at the time, that it was still running and still saving to local storage. Nobody had ever mentioned it to him. He'd written it in the maintenance log and closed the ticket and moved on. He went to 40, retrieved the local storage drive, and plugged it into his laptop. The footage was low resolution, the angle not quite right, but it was functional. And what it showed, from the past several hours, was enough to make Logan sit very still for about 20 seconds. The conversations in the corridor, the documents. Hargrove's hand on Isabella's arm, briefly, in a gesture that was less escort and more control. The 4 men from the suits. The angle caught just enough of body language and visible paper exchanges to tell a story that matched what Logan had pieced together. He copied what he needed. He encrypted the files with a password that he wrote in his notebook and kept in his chest pocket. Then he sat with the cold understanding of what he had and what he still needed to do. The yacht. Tuesday morning, before the Harbor Authority office opens. That was tonight. They were moving her tonight. His phone buzzed. Delia. Harbor Master's number. Also, one of the dock vehicles logged out 2 hours ago from the sub-level garage. Destination listed as the marina. Logan, please tell me what's happening. He typed back. Working on it. I need you to do one more thing. If you don't hear from me by midnight, call the harbor police. Tell them there's a passenger on the Vaughn Hospitality Group's registered yacht who didn't board voluntarily. 3 dots. Then, I don't like this. Neither do I, he typed. But I need someone who isn't compromised to know where I am. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the ceiling of the mechanical room for a moment, listening to the building breathe around him. The hiss of climate systems, the low hum of elevators, all the ordinary sounds of a building doing what buildings did, indifferent to the things happening inside them. He thought about Owen, who would be getting out of school in 40 minutes, and going to Mrs. Cardoza next door, who had his key and his routine, and who he'd known long enough to be comfortable with. Owen was fine. Owen was always more fine than Logan was about Owen being fine. He thought about a woman in a corridor who had 3 seconds and used them to ask for help in the only language she trusted a stranger to understand. He stood up. The marina was 11 minutes from the hotel by car. Less if you knew which side streets cut through, and Logan knew them because he'd driven them twice a week for 2 years, taking Owen to his Saturday speech therapy appointments at the clinic near the waterfront. He got to his truck, changed out of his uniform jacket into the dark work coat he kept in the back, and drove to the marina in the rain that had come back while he was in the building, harder now, the kind of October rain that came off the water sideways. The Crown Meridian maintained a company yacht, the Meridian Star, 62 feet, registered to the Vaughn Hospitality Group, that was used for client entertainment events and corporate retreats. Logan had never been on it, but he knew where it was docked because Delia had mentioned the dock vehicle, and because the marina had a section designated for commercial and corporate vessels that he'd passed 100 times. He parked a block away and walked. The marina at 9 in the evening in a storm was not a comfortable place to be, which worked in his favor. There was almost nobody around. The dock lights threw pale rings on the water, and the yacht hulls moved and knocked against the dock in the swell, and the rain was loud enough to cover sound. He found the Meridian Star at the end of the third dock. The lights were on below deck. Getting aboard wasn't as complicated as it probably should have been, which Logan attributed to the fact that the people inside it hadn't anticipated that anyone would try. They believed, reasonably, that the building had been controlled and the exit sealed and the situation managed. They weren't wrong about the building. They just missed one maintenance worker who moved through the parts of the building nobody watched. He went over the stern rail while the boat was pitching in the swell, stayed low on the deck, and found the utility access panel for the yacht's communication systems at the port side of the aft deck. A service panel he could identify because service panels on boats looked the same way they looked everywhere, utilitarian and slightly industrial in a way that didn't match the rest of the design. He knew the communication system, not this specific one, but the manufacturer. It was the same brand as the backup system in the hotel's third-floor conference center, which he'd worked on twice. The broadcast routing was different on the Marine unit, but the principle was the same. He needed 15 minutes. He had his encrypted files. He had the external drive. He heard voices through the hull below him and did not let himself think about what was happening to Isabella in the time it took him to work. He got the panel open, connected his drive, worked through the routing sequence by memory and by guesswork, and by the third attempt at a sequence that should have worked on the second attempt. The rain was soaking through his coat. His hands were shaking, but not badly. The system came online. He had one shot at this. The broadcast function on the Marine unit would transmit on the emergency maritime frequency, plus any secondary frequencies the system had been pre-configured to reach. This yacht system, he discovered, had been configured to reach the company's internal media server, probably for entertainment or presentation purposes, which meant it also reached anything the company's media server was connected to. He had the encrypted files. He had the recording. He started the broadcast. What? He didn't know it was going to go the way it went. He'd expected to buy enough time for the police to respond to Delia's call. What he hadn't anticipated was that the Vaughn Hospitality Group's internal media server was connected to several external media monitoring services as part of their corporate communications setup, and that the emergency broadcast frequency would ping 2 news station monitoring systems within 40 seconds of his transmission beginning. He also hadn't anticipated the main cabin door opening behind him while he was still bent over the access panel. He turned around. The man standing on the deck was not Hargrove. He was older than Hargrove, somewhere in his late 60s, wearing a coat that said he'd dressed for a yacht meeting rather than a storm, and he looked at Logan with an expression that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite anger. It was something more specific than both. The expression of a man who has been winning for a very long time, looking at the first thing that has inconvenienced him. "Who are you?" the man said. "Maintenance," Logan said, which was true. Later he would learn the man's name, Victor Crane, Isabella's maternal uncle, the man who had helped her build the company in its early years, who had sat in the advisory role she'd offered him because she trusted him more than anyone, who had spent the last 2 years quietly positioning her employees and her board against her because he'd decided at some point that the empire he'd helped build should have been his to control. Victor Crane looked at the access panel, looked at Logan's hands, looked at the transmission status light that was blinking green. "Stop it," he said. "It's already running," Logan said. Crane nodded once, in a way that meant, "I see," and then 2 men came out of the cabin behind him. The next 4 minutes were not clean or controlled. Logan had not been in a fight since he was 23, which was 9 years ago. And that one had lasted approximately 45 seconds in a bar parking lot and left him with a split lip and a bruised rib and a comprehensive lesson in his own physical limitations. He was not a large man. He was not particularly strong in any extraordinary way. He was, however, a man who worked physically for a living, who spent his days climbing into tight spaces and lifting equipment and troubleshooting problems with his hands, and who was fighting for something that mattered to him in a way that made him willing to absorb a considerable amount of pain in exchange for maintaining contact with the access panel. They pulled him away from it. He got back. They got him farther away. The deck was wet and the boat was pitching, and at some point the railing was very close to the water, and that was when the cabin door opened a second time and Isabella Vaughn came up the steps and saw what was happening. She was not what Logan had expected, though he would have been hard-pressed to say what he had expected. She had a fire extinguisher. She used it on the larger of the two men holding Logan with a directness that suggested she had been waiting for exactly this opportunity, and had been thinking, while waiting, about how to maximize it. The man went sideways. The other one turned. Logan hit him with an elbow in the way that makes a person reconsider their priorities, which this person did, letting go long enough for Logan to get back to the access panel. The transmission light was still green. Victor Crane looked at his niece across the wet deck in the rain. "Isabella," he said in a voice that was genuinely tired. "This doesn't have to—" "Stop talking," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that a person's voice was steady when they were past the part where they were scared and into the part where they were angry. "Just stop." The transmission ran for 6 more minutes before the harbor police boat appeared around the breakwater. Logan sat on the dock afterward with a cut above his eye and a pain in his left side that he would discover the next morning was a cracked rib, watching the harbor police board the yacht and listening to the rain, which had slowed to a more reasonable intensity. Isabella sat down next to him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The dock was lit by the police boat's working lights, and the water was still rough, and somewhere down the dock someone was talking into a radio. "How did you know?" she asked. "The sign. How did you know what I was saying?" He looked at her. "My son is deaf. I've been speaking with my hands for 8 years. She absorbed that. "How old is he?" 8. She nodded slowly. "He must be remarkable." "He is." Logan paused. "He'd probably tell you this whole situation was unnecessary, and I should have just called the police immediately." "What would you say to that?" "He'd be mostly right." He shifted, winced. "Mostly." She looked at him, really looked at him, in the way that people didn't look at him very often in this building. "You didn't have to do this." "You signed," he said simply. "That's not something you ignore." Down the dock, someone was leading Victor Crane in handcuffs. Isabella watched him, and her expression was not the expression Logan would have predicted. Not satisfaction, not relief, not even the particular cold clarity of someone who has been vindicated. It was something quieter and more exhausted. The look of someone who had trusted a person completely and found out what that had actually cost. "He helped me build it," she said, almost to herself. "Every time I doubted, he was there. I thought—" She stopped. Logan didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. After a moment, she said, "What's your name?" "Logan Mercer, Facilities." She nodded. "Logan Mercer, Facilities." She said it like she was committing it to memory, which he would later understand she was. "I'm going to remember that." He looked back at the water. His side hurt. His eye was bleeding into his coat. He was soaking wet, and it was past 10 o'clock, and he'd need to be back in that building in 8 hours to deal with the copper fitting on the 3rd floor before it became a flood. And somewhere on the other side of the city, Owen was asleep at Mrs. Cardoza's with no idea what his father had been doing tonight, which was exactly how Logan wanted it. He fished his phone out of his coat pocket, texted Delia, "Call off the harbor. Police are already here. 3 dots. Then, "I already know. It's on the news." He looked up at the sky, which was doing that thing where the rain had stopped, but the clouds were still moving fast, and somewhere behind them there was a half moon trying to get through. He thought, Okay then. He sat on the dock for another few minutes before anyone asked him to move, and he let the cold air come off the water. And he didn't think about anything in particular. That was enough. The cracked rib made itself known at 5:47 in the morning, which was when Logan rolled over in bed and his body informed him, with considerable clarity, that the previous night had not been without consequence. He lay still for a moment, breathing carefully, cataloging the damage the way he cataloged building problems, methodically, without drama, in order of priority. The rib was the main issue. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding on its own, and the butterfly bandage he'd applied at midnight was holding. His knuckles were bruised but functional. The stiffness in his shoulders was the kind that came from cold and tension and would work itself out by mid-morning. He got up slowly, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The news had run the story through the night. He knew this because Delia had texted him 4 times between 11 and 2 a.m. What's each message containing a different link to a different outlet, the headlines growing progressively more specific as reporters assembled the fuller picture. By the time he'd finally silenced his phone and tried to sleep, the story had a shape. Attempted corporate takeover, conspiracy involving senior executives and board members, a CEO, held against her will, a maritime confrontation during a harbor storm. The name Logan Mercer did not appear in any of the early reports, which suited him entirely. Owen came downstairs at 6:15, took one look at his father's face, and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. His hands moved. "What happened to your eye?" "Work," Logan signed back. "I'm fine." Owen gave him the specific look he'd been giving Logan since he was about 5, the one that communicated with considerable efficiency that he was not fooled and was choosing not to push the matter at this particular moment. He went to the refrigerator, got out the orange juice, poured 2 glasses, and set one in front of Logan without being asked. They ate breakfast together without discussing it further. That was one of the things Logan had come to understand about raising a kid who communicated differently from most of the world. Silence wasn't the same thing as absence. Owen was thinking about his father's eye and his father's stiff movements and whatever had happened at work. He just didn't need to fill the air with it. He'd ask when he was ready. He was 8, and he was already better at that than most adults Logan knew. Bomb! The police call came at 8:40, while Logan was in his truck in the hospital parking lot getting the rib officially confirmed as cracked rather than broken. A distinction the attending physician made in a tone that suggested he found it marginally important. Logan was told to take it easy, wrap it, avoid strenuous lifting for 6 weeks, and given a look that communicated the physician's skepticism about whether any of that advice would be followed. The detective's name was Carver. She was professional and direct and took his account in a straightforward manner that Logan appreciated, asking him to go through the afternoon in order and interrupting only for clarification. She had a small notebook, actual paper, which made Logan like her slightly. She was particularly interested in the signal relay in the IT room, the legacy recording system on 40, and the security staff. 2 of the 3 on-duty security personnel are under investigation, she confirmed. The third, a woman named Peterson, she wasn't in the loop. She's the one who let us know the building exits had been locked down, actually. Filed an internal report 2 hours before we got the maritime call. I didn't know that, Logan said. Most people don't notice what the person doing the right thing is doing. They notice what goes wrong. Carver looked at him steadily. The recording from the 41st floor corridor is going to be central to the case. That was good thinking. I knew the module was still running. I put it in the maintenance log, which nobody read. Maintenance logs, Logan said, are not widely read. She made a note. Then she asked, "How well do you know Ms. Vaughn?" "I didn't know her at all before yesterday." "But you risked significant physical harm for someone you didn't know." Logan thought about how to answer that, then settled on the truth because it was also the simplest version. She asked for help. I understood what she was asking. That's the whole thing. Carver looked at him for a moment. "Mr. Mercer, I've been doing this a long time. Most people in that situation find a reason why it's not their problem." Logan didn't have an answer for that. He put it in the category of things that were true but didn't require a response, which was a category he found useful. He drove back to the hotel with the radio off. The Crown Meridian was not the same building he'd left the night before. He knew this before he walked through the employee entrance, because there were 2 news vans on the street out front and a cluster of people near the main entrance who were not guests. The energy in the lobby was the specific energy of a place where something significant had happened, and the people who worked there were in the process of recalibrating what normal meant now. Delia met him near the service elevator with a coffee she handed him without ceremony. "Hargrove's gone," she said. "Escorted out this morning at 7. Eastbrook and Pellman have both been unreachable since last night." She kept her voice down without being told to. "The interim manager is a woman named Forsyth. Flew in from the company's regional office at 6 this morning. She's been on the phone since she arrived." "How's the team?" Delia looked at him. "Your team is fine. They're worried about you because I told them not to worry about you, which means they're all worrying about you." She paused. "Your eye looks terrible." "I'm aware. And you're moving like your ribs hurt." "One rib. It's cracked, not broken. There's a distinction." I'm glad the medical system has given you that to hold on to. She handed him a piece of paper. Forsyth wants to talk to you this afternoon. 2:00. That's not a request. He took the paper. What about the third floor fitting? She stared at him. Logan? It's going to flood if... Marcus is handling the fitting. Marcus has been handling it since 7:30 because I called him and told him to because I knew you'd ask about it before you asked about anything else. She crossed her arms. You stopped a corporate coup from a hospital bed and your first question is about a pipe. I wasn't in a hospital bed. I was in an outpatient. Go home. I'm not going home. She looked at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a person appealing to a source of patience that may or may not exist. At least sit down somewhere that isn't a maintenance corridor. He compromised by spending the morning in the facilities office, which had a chair that was only marginally more comfortable than a maintenance corridor, but did have better coffee. The work orders needed processing regardless of what was happening 3 floors above him, and the distraction of ordinary paperwork had a settling effect on his nervous system that he didn't question. He was reviewing the HVAC complaint log from the previous week when his phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Mercer. A woman's voice, clear, controlled, with an undercurrent of something that was either exhaustion or relief or possibly both. This is Isabella Vaughn. He had not expected a phone call. He said, Miss Vaughn? I got your number from Delia Chen. I hope that's, it's fine. A brief pause. How are you? I was told about the rib. It's cracked, not broken. I've been told that's a meaningful distinction. That's what the doctor said. Another pause, slightly longer. He had the impression she was choosing her words with the same care she'd used in that corridor, which was to say carefully, but not so carefully that it became performance. I want to say thank you. I'm aware that sounds insufficient for what you did last night, but I mean it plainly. You didn't have to do any of it, and you did, and I... She stopped. Thank you. You're welcome, he said, because it was true, and because the alternative was some version of it was nothing that would have been a lie, and they would both have known it. She said, I'd like to meet with you, not for... This isn't about the company or the investigation. I just want to meet the person I'm thanking in person rather than through a phone screen. I'm here until 5. I know, Delia told me that too. Something in her voice shifted, a degree less formal. She seems very protective of you. She's protective of the building, he said. I'm part of the building. He heard something that might have been a quiet laugh before she caught it. 2:00 is taken. Is 3:30 possible? 3:30 works. She hung up. Logan looked at his phone for a moment, then set it down and went back to the HVAC log, which was more complicated and in some ways more manageable than what had just been scheduled for later in the afternoon. Pod. The meeting with Forsyth at 2:00 was efficient. Forsyth was a compact, direct woman in her 50s who had the energy of someone who had been parachuted into complex situations before and had developed a working relationship with chaos that was neither comfortable nor unfamiliar. She had reviewed the maintenance logs. She had reviewed specifically the note about the legacy recording module on 40, the service access logs that showed Logan's movements through the building, and the IT work orders from the past month that documented the signal relay installation, which he had not noticed in real time, but which appeared in the system as an anomaly that, in retrospect, should have flagged an alert. The relay was authorized under a dummy contractor code, Forsyth said. She had a coffee that she'd been drinking steadily throughout the meeting and that was now about half gone. Someone in Hargrove's office created the authorization. It's part of the investigation. She looked at Logan across the table. You documented the anomaly in the maintenance cross-reference log. I cross-reference contractor access with work orders. If a contractor enters a restricted mechanical space and there's no corresponding work order in the system, I make a note. Does everyone in your position do that? No. She made a note on her own pad. The company's going to need a full facilities audit. The security systems, the access logs, the communication infrastructure, all of it needs to be reviewed by someone who knows the building in a way that the outside consultants won't. She looked at him steadily. That's you, Mr. Mercer. I know the building. I'm aware. She closed the folder. You'll be compensated additionally for the audit work. I want a preliminary assessment of compromised systems within 2 weeks. He nodded. She looked at him for a moment more. The slight hesitation of someone who had one more thing and wasn't sure of the register to use for it. What you did last night, the harbor. She paused. The company owes you more than an audit assignment and a pay adjustment. I didn't do it for the company. She held his gaze. No, I know you didn't. She stood, which meant the meeting was done. 2 weeks, Mr. Mercer, and go home after 3:30. That's a directive, not a suggestion. Isabella Vaughn arrived at 3:28. Logan was in the facilities office when Delia knocked and opened the door, and the look Delia gave him was a look he catalogued for future reference, the specific expression of a person who feels that circumstances have arranged themselves in an interesting way and is choosing not to comment on it directly. Isabella looked different than she had the previous night, still put together, still carrying the particular quality of presence that Logan had noticed in the lobby, but with a tiredness underneath it now that wasn't hidden, just not concealed. She'd been up as long as he had, probably more. She was dealing with things he couldn't fully imagine. Lawyers, board members, media, the entire unwinding of a conspiracy that had been living inside her company for months. She looked at his eye first. Then she looked at the facilities office, which was a small room with fluorescent lighting and a wall of metal shelving and a whiteboard with work orders and a coffee machine that had seen better decades. "This is your office," she said. "Yes." "How long have you been in here?" 4 years. He gestured at the chair across from his desk, which he'd cleared of the binders that normally lived on it. "Sit down." She sat. He sat. For a moment, neither of them said anything, which was less awkward than it probably should have been. "You look exhausted," he said, because it was true and because saying something accurate felt more respectful than pretending he hadn't noticed. "I've had about 3 hours of sleep." She pulled her coat closed slightly, a self-contained gesture. "I keep going over it. Months. This was planned for months while I was running the company, making decisions, trusting people." She stopped. "Victor sat in board meetings and advised me and I asked for his opinion, and he was already—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Logan said, "You couldn't have known." "I should have seen something." "Maybe. But that's a different conversation from what actually happened." He paused, picking the words carefully. "You signed for help because you saw a window and you had about 3 seconds to use it. That's not someone who wasn't paying attention. That's someone who was paying attention to everything." She looked at him. "You learned sign language for your son. He needed a way to talk to me. That was more important than my not knowing how." "How old was he when I started?" "He was born deaf. I started learning when he was about 3 weeks old." He thought about that period, which was not his proudest time, the fear and the steep curve and the night he'd dropped a signing dictionary in the hospital parking lot and stood there in the dark for a full minute just collecting himself. "I was bad at it for a long time." "How long?" "A year before I could hold a basic conversation, 2 before it stopped feeling like translation." He paused. "Now it's just how we talk." She was quiet for a moment. There was something in her expression that was working through something, and he let it work. "What's his name?" she asked. "Owen." She nodded. Is he okay? Does he know what happened?" "He knows I hurt my eye at work." He gave me a look that said he didn't entirely believe the explanation and then poured me orange juice. Logan paused. "He'll ask the real question when he's ready. He usually does." Yes, something shifted in her expression. A softening that wasn't weakness, just a momentary lowering of the particular guard that people in her position maintained so continuously they probably stopped noticing it was there. "He sounds like he's doing all right." "He's doing better than all right most of the time. He has hard days." Logan considered. "We both have hard days." "His mother?" He answered the question without flinching from it, the way he'd learned to over the years. "She left when he was 2. It wasn't a dramatic thing. She wasn't ready for what the life was. I don't hold it against her the way I used to." He paused. "Owen doesn't remember her."
I don't know if that's easier or harder, probably both. Isabella received that without the awkward pivot that most people made, which he appreciated. She just nodded and let the information sit, which was the correct thing to do with it. I want to ask you something, she said. Okay. Last night, on the dock, you sat there with a cracked rib in the rain and you looked like you were, she searched for the word, resting. Like the whole thing had been a long shift and you were just sitting at the end of it. That's what it was. Most people in that situation would have been angry or scared or needing to talk through what just happened. She tilted her head slightly. You weren't any of those things. He considered the question seriously because it deserved that. I was scared earlier. When I was in the building, putting it together, understanding how coordinated it was. That was the scary part. He paused. Once I was on the boat, there wasn't time to be scared. There was just the access panel and the transmission and the thing that needed doing. He shrugged, which pulled at the rib, which he regretted. I've been doing maintenance long enough that the part I'm trained for doesn't scare me. It's the not knowing that's hard. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the not knowing is the only thing I've been living in for the past 12 hours. I know. He looked at her. It's going to take a while to feel stable again. The ground moved. That takes time. She smiled slightly, the first real one he'd seen from her. Not the controlled public version, but the smaller, tireder, more honest one. You're not what I expected a maintenance supervisor to say. What did you expect? Something about paperwork, insurance claims. That's tomorrow's problem. He stood slowly. You should go home, or wherever you're staying. You need sleep more than you need another conversation today. She stood too. I have 7 more meetings. I know. He picked up the coffee cups. Cancel at least 2 of them. She looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between surprised and amused. Do you give orders often? Only when the building needs it. He paused at the door. The company's going to be fine. You stopped it. It's going to be complicated and it's going to take time, but you stopped it. She stood in the doorway of his small, fluorescent-lit, cluttered office and looked at him with an expression he didn't have a full name for. Some combination of gratitude and assessment, and something quieter than both. Logan Mercer, she said. Facilities. That's me. She left. He stood in the empty office for a moment, listening to the building around him. The climate systems, the elevator hum, all the ordinary sounds that meant everything was still functioning, and felt the specific, tired weight of the past 24 hours settle fully into his bones. He had a work order to close out. He had a preliminary audit to start planning. He had a son who would be at Mrs. Cardoza's until 6, and who, at some point tonight, would ask the real question about his father's eye. He sat back down, opened the maintenance log, and got back to work. The audit took 11 days. Logan had estimated 2 weeks in his conversation with Forsyth, but 11 days was what it actually required, which was partly because he knew the building the way you only knew something you'd been responsible for over years, and partly because once he started pulling threads, the threads kept leading somewhere. The compromised systems were more extensive than the initial assessment suggested. The signal relay in the IT room was one piece. There were 2 others, a secondary relay patched into the building's access card infrastructure, and a monitoring tap on the executive floor phone lines that was so cleanly installed, Logan had to look at it 3 times before he was certain it wasn't original equipment. Someone had been thorough. Someone had known the building well enough to hide things in it carefully, which meant either a long period of access or help from someone on the inside who understood physical infrastructure. The security staff investigation was already active. Logan documented everything he found, photographed it, cross-referenced it with the access logs, and wrote it up in a report that ran to 31 pages, which was 30 pages longer than any document he'd produced in 4 years of maintenance work. Forsyth read it in one sitting. He knew this because she called him 40 minutes after he submitted it electronically. "This is exceptional work," she said. "It's documentation. That's part of the job." "Mr. Mercer." A pause. "Accept the compliment." He accepted it and moved on. The rib healed at the pace ribs healed, which was to say slowly and with periodic reminders that it was still in progress. He told Owen the full version of events on the second night.
Simplified but honest, because Owen had a precise internal detector for the condensed version of a story and the complete version, and attempting the former when the latter was required produced a look of patient disappointment that Logan found difficult to sustain. He'd signed the whole thing at the kitchen table after dinner. The yacht, the access panel, the men on the deck. He left out some of the physical detail because Owen was 8, but he didn't sanitize the core of it. Owen had listened with his full attention, the way he always listened. Still, tracking, processing in a way that was visible on his face before he responded. When Logan finished, Owen sat for a moment. Then he signed, "Was she scared?" Logan thought about Isabella on that deck with a fire extinguisher. At first, then she was angry. Owen considered this. That's better than staying scared. "Yeah," Logan signed. "It is." Owen picked up his fork and went back to his dinner, which was his way of indicating the conversation was complete for now, though Logan knew the questions would continue to surface over the next few days in the way Owen processed things. Not all at once, but incrementally, in small installments, when the timing felt right to him. That was a thing Logan had learned about his son that he suspected applied to more people than just Owen. The important questions rarely came out immediately. They came later when the person had turned the thing over enough times to know which question was actually the important one. The news cycle ran hard on the story for about a week before the usual churn pulled it toward the next thing. Logan's name appeared on the second day in a piece that described him as a hotel maintenance worker who had uncovered and disrupted the conspiracy from within the building. The photograph they used was from the hotel's employee directory, which was a 4-year-old ID photo in which he looked like a man being photographed against his preference, which was accurate. By the third day, there were 3 separate profiles circulating online, each of which got some details wrong in different ways, which he found more interesting than troubling. He did not give interviews. A communications person from Vaughn Hospitality Group's media office called him twice to offer media coordination support, and he politely declined both times, which he gathered was not the expected response. The expected response apparently was to leverage the moment. Multiple people. A former colleague, his brother who called from out of state, 2 strangers who found his work email somehow, suggested variations of this, that he should capitalize on the visibility, that this was an opportunity. He understood what they meant. He just didn't experience it the way they seemed to assume he would. He hadn't gone onto that yacht because he'd calculated an opportunity. He'd gone because a woman had asked for help, and he'd been able to help, and not doing it had not been a real option once he understood what was happening. The news cycle, and the profiles, and the strangers in his work email were things that had happened as a result of that, but they weren't the thing itself. He said as much to Owen when Owen asked why his dad wasn't on television. "Because there's nothing to say that isn't already said," Logan signed. "I did what needed doing. That's it." Owen thought about it. "People want to hear about it, though, I know. Is that bad?" Logan thought about that seriously, because it deserved serious thought. "No, it's just not mine to give them." Owen accepted that and went back to his tablet. Fine. Isabella called on a Thursday, 11 days after the doc, which was the same day Logan submitted the audit report. "I read it," she said. "The audit. Forsyth forwarded it this morning." "I figured she would. The secondary relay on the access card system. I didn't know about that until this report." Her voice was different on the phone than it had been in his office. Still controlled, but the tiredness had changed into something more functional. Like a person who'd gotten enough sleep to stop running on emergency reserves and was now just running normally. That would have given them a record of every executive's building movements for 3 weeks. At minimum, probably longer. The install date on the hardware puts it at 6 weeks before the board meeting. Logan had been thinking about this. They were watching who met with whom, building the picture. To know which executives were still genuinely loyal to me, she paused. Victor always said information was the real currency. I thought he meant market information. She said it flatly, without inflection, in the manner of a person who had processed the bitterness down to something cooler and harder and more permanent. Logan didn't comment on Victor Crane. That was not his territory. "The report is going to be part of the criminal case," Isabella said. "The prosecutor's office may contact you for additional documentation." "That's fine," A pause. How's the rib? Better. Another few weeks. Owen? He'd noticed she asked about Owen every time they spoke, which had been 4 times now. The doc, the facilities office, 2 phone calls. Each time it was a direct question, genuinely asked, not conversational filler. He's good. He had a science project due yesterday. Built something with magnets and a motor that I did not fully understand, but that his teacher apparently found impressive. He heard something warm in her silence. What did he say about it? He said the teacher didn't understand it either, but was too polite to ask him to explain it twice. A short, real laugh, not the compressed version from the first phone call. Something fuller. He sounds like a handful. He's the opposite of a handful. That's almost the harder thing. Logan looked at the ceiling. He's very easy to be around. He just makes you want to be better at things. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had a quality he'd come to recognize over the past week and a half. That specific shift when she moved from business register to something more unguarded. It happened in increments. He noticed it the way he noticed building things. Not because he was looking for it, but because noticing things was how he was wired. I want to come back to the hotel, she said. Not for... I'll be there for business reasons, obviously. I'm meeting with Forsyth and the new interim board structure on Monday, but I wanted to tell you in advance rather than just appearing. You own the building. You don't need to tell me in advance. I know I don't need to. A beat. I wanted to. He thought about how to answer that and settled on, Monday's fine. I'll probably stop by the facilities office. If that's... The door's open. After she hung up, Logan sat in the quiet of the facilities office for a minute, listening to the building. The vent on the north side of the room had developed a faint whistle over the past week that he'd been meaning to adjust. He got up, went to the vent, made the adjustment with a screwdriver from his chest pocket, and listened to the whistle stop. He went back to his desk and opened the next work order. Monday arrived with the specific quality of a November Monday, gray and direct and indifferent to anyone's preferences about it. Logan was on the property by 6:30, had run his morning check of the mechanical rooms by 7:15, and was in the briefing by 7 sharp. Marcus had handled the 3rd floor fitting correctly. The HVAC complaints from the previous week had been resolved. There was a new list to replace the old one, which was how it always worked. Logan went through it efficiently, assigned accordingly, noted 3 items that needed his personal attention, and dismissed the team at 7:20. Delia lingered. Forsyth's meeting is at 10, she said. Isabella Vaughn arrives at 9:45, according to the front desk schedule. I know. I'm just keeping you informed. You're doing more than that. She considered this and conceded it with a tilt of her head. She asked Forsyth about you. I found out through the administrative assistant network, which is not a formal network but is nonetheless extremely functional. She looked at him with the particular look she used when she was about to say something she'd decided needed to be said. She asked whether you were happy here. Those were the exact words, apparently. Whether you were happy here. Logan was quiet for a moment. What do you think that means? Delia asked. I think it means she's deciding something. He paused. And I think it means she's trying to decide it correctly instead of just deciding it. Delia nodded slowly. And what do you think about that? He picked up his coffee. I think I have a damper adjustment on the 14th floor that needs doing before 10. She let him go, which was its own kind of answer. Babas. Isabella arrived at 9:43, which was 2 minutes earlier than the front desk schedule had indicated, and Logan knew this because he happened to be crossing the lobby on his way back from the 14th floor when she came through the main entrance. She was dressed differently from the first time. Not the urgency of that first afternoon, not the rain-soaked exhaustion of the dock, but something more deliberate. She looked like herself, he thought, without being able to fully articulate what that meant. Someone who was back on her own ground after having been knocked off it. She saw him across the lobby, and the moment of recognition was instantaneous on both sides. She walked toward him rather than toward the elevator bank, which required a slight change of direction. You're early, he said. Traffic was better than I planned for. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him in the office. Not the CEO reading a room version, but the other one. How's the building?
still standing. Because of you. He shook his head slightly. Because Delia called Marcus about the fitting and Marcus did his job and the rest of the team did theirs. He paused. Buildings don't run on one person. No, she said. They don't. She looked at him steadily. But they need the right person in the right place. Someone who actually sees what's in front of them. He didn't answer that directly. Instead, Forsyth's ready for you. She's been here since 8. Isabella smiled, the honest, smaller one that he'd seen for the first time in his office. You're redirecting me. I'm pointing you at your 10 o'clock. Is that what you're doing? That's what I'm doing. She looked at him for a moment longer, and there was something in her expression that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite frustration, and was possibly just the experience of being in the company of someone who responded to things in ways she hadn't fully mapped yet.
I'll find you after, she said. Not a question. I'll be somewhere in the building, he said. I usually am. She went toward the elevator. He went toward the service corridor. The lobby returned to its normal state, guests moving through it in the ordinary way, the building doing what it did. She found him at 12:15 in the third-floor mechanical room, which was where he was when she texted, an actual text this time, which meant she'd put his number in her phone, which she'd gotten from the facility's office contact list. Where are you? He texted back the floor and room number. 5 minutes later, she knocked on the mechanical room door, which was not a door that got knocked on frequently. He opened it. She was still in her meeting clothes, coat over her arm, phone in her hand, and she looked like someone who had come out of a 2-hour meeting carrying the weight of it, but was not letting it show on her face. That was harder than I expected, she said. The meeting? The board structure. There are people who are tangentially connected to Hargrove's network who aren't technically implicated, but who I also cannot fully trust. And I have to work around that without appearing to work around it while simultaneously rebuilding the executive layer above them. She leaned against the door frame. It's like trying to replace the foundation of a building while the building is still operating. Logan thought about this. You don't replace the foundation while it's running. You identify which sections are compromised. You shore up the adjacent load-bearing elements, and you do the replacement in stages so nothing collapses. She looked at him. That's actually useful. It's how structural repair works. It's also how this works. She straightened. Can I show you something? He followed her to the elevator, then up to the 41st floor. Not the Pemberton suite, but the executive office area, which he'd been in numerous times but which felt different now with the building's recent history sitting over it. She took him to the large window at the end of the corridor, the same one where she'd been standing with Hargrove 3 weeks ago. From this height, the harbor was visible in the distance. The marina where the Meridian Star was docked, currently impounded as part of the investigation, was visible if you knew where to look. I stood at this window a lot in the early days, she said. When I was first building the company, I used to think if I could get high enough to see all of it, I could manage all of it. She paused. Victor taught me that. He said vision was the thing that separated leaders from managers. Logan waited. He also taught me that loyalty was everything, she continued, that the people around you defined what you could build. She looked at the harbor. He wasn't wrong about any of it, as a principle. He was just applying it to himself the whole time. The thing he taught you still holds, Logan said. The loyalty thing. It just turned out to include people he hadn't counted on. She turned to look at him. Delia, Peterson, the security officer who filed the report, the team that kept the building running while all of this was happening. He paused. Those are the loyal ones. They were just in the parts of the building nobody was watching. She was quiet for a long moment. The harbor was gray and ordinary in the November light. I've been thinking about something, she said. A foundation. For children with hearing disabilities. I've been thinking about it since the doc, actually. Since you told me about Owen. She turned to face him fully. The company has the resources for it. We've been looking at community investment structures for 2 years and never landed on the right thing. A pause. I think this is the right thing. He looked at her. The idea moved through him in a way he hadn't expected. Not the managed reaction of a person hearing a business proposal, but something more unguarded than that. Something that had to do with Owen at 3 years old, and the phrase book, and the parking lot at the hospital.
"Why are you telling me?" he said. "Because I want to know if it's the right thing, or if it just feels like the right thing to me." She held his gaze. "Those aren't always the same." He thought about it honestly. "It's both," he said finally. "But both can be right at the same time." She nodded slowly. Then, "I want you involved, not peripherally. I want you involved in building it. I'm a maintenance supervisor. You're someone who understands what children like Owen actually need better than anyone I have in the company." She said it with the directness she used when she'd already considered the counter-arguments and found them insufficient. "You don't have to decide today." "I know." She put her coat back on. "I have a 3 o'clock with the company's legal team." She started toward the elevator. "Thank you for the structural repair analogy. I'm going to use it in approximately 45 minutes. Let me know if it works." "I will." She pressed the elevator button. "Logan." He looked at her. "The thing you said. On the dock. You said you went because she asked and you understood, and that was the whole thing." She paused. "I've been thinking about that for 3 weeks, about how few people in my life have ever operated that simply." The elevator opened. "It's not simple," he said. "It's just what matters." She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped into the elevator and the doors closed. He stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at the harbor through the window. The light was doing that thing it did in November, flat and clear and without pretense. Somewhere across the city, Owen was in school, learning something about magnets or math or the mechanics of things, and Logan had a work order for the freight elevator sensor that had been on his list for 2 weeks and needed doing before the end of the day. He went to do it. But he stood at the window for another minute first, looking at the harbor, feeling the particular quiet of a building that was still standing and would continue to stand, and thinking about how sometimes the most important things in your life arrived not through a door you'd been watching, but through one you hadn't known was there. He didn't name what was happening between him and Isabella Vaughn. It was too early for names, and he was a man who didn't reach for words before he needed them. But he registered it the same way he registered anything in the building that had shifted from its previous state, carefully, without rushing to a conclusion, noting the change and watching to see what it meant. He picked up his tool bag and went to the freight elevator. The work was still there. That, at least, was constant. The criminal case against Victor Crane and his associates moved through the court system the way complex financial crimes moved, methodically, without drama, in the language of evidence and depositions and pretrial motions that bore almost no resemblance to the night on the harbor that had produced them. Logan was deposed in December. He sat in a law office conference room for 3 hours with the prosecutor's team and walked them through the audit findings, the mechanical room conversations, the legacy recording system on 40, the sequence of decisions that had taken him from a copper fitting on the 3rd floor to a yacht in a storm. The prosecutors were thorough and precise. They treated his documentation with a seriousness that told him the case was solid before they confirmed it directly. Victor Crane had retained counsel that had, according to the newspaper coverage, attempted 3 separate procedural challenges in the first 6 weeks. All 3 had been denied. The 2 board members, Eastbrook and Pellman, had entered into cooperation negotiations almost immediately, which said something about the quality of their loyalty to the man they'd helped scheme with. Hargrove was charged separately. His cooperation partial and conditional, the kind of legal positioning that suggested a man who understood he was caught and was calibrating the degree of damage. Logan read about it the way he read the weather, aware of it, noting the developments, not letting it become the foreground of his daily life. The legal process was happening. He was part of it as a witness, not as a principal. The outcome was, at this point, largely out of his hands. What was in his hands was the building, the audit follow-up, and the work that had continued through all of it, the way work continued through everything. What was also in his hands, or more precisely, on his kitchen table, was a folder that had been delivered by messenger to the Crown Meridian's facilities office in the 2nd week of December, addressed to him personally and marked with the Vaughn Hospitality Group letterhead. He'd opened it at home that evening, with Owen doing homework at the other end of the table and the radio on low, and he'd read through the contents twice before he set it down. The folder contained the preliminary framework for the foundation Isabella had described at the 41st floor window. The Hearing Disability Children's Foundation, formalized now, given a name,
The Owen Initiative written at the top of the page in a way that stopped him cold for a full 10 seconds. She'd named it after his son without asking him first. At the bottom of the last page, a handwritten note. I should have asked. I wanted to show you what it looked like with the name first, to see if it was right. If you hate it, I'll change it. IV. Owen had looked up from his homework and seen his father's face. What is it? He signed. Logan turned the folder around and showed him the cover page. Owen read it. His expression went through several stages: confusion, recognition, something more complicated than either. He looked at the page for a long time. Then he signed. Someone named a thing after me? Ms. Vaughn, the woman from the hotel. Owen looked at the page again. Then he signed carefully. Does she know I'm just a kid? Logan felt something pull loose in his chest, the particular helpless thing that happened when his son said something that was both exactly right and exactly wrong at the same time. Yeah, he signed. She knows. Owen considered this for another moment, then signed. Okay then, and went back to his homework. Logan sat with the folder and the radio playing low and the ordinary sound of his son's pencil on paper, and he thought about how to respond to Isabella's note. He thought about it for a while. He texted her at 9:15 after Owen was in bed. The name is right. Don't change it. 3 dots. Then, thank you. Are you in? He looked at that for a moment. Then he typed, yes. The new year arrived with the particular quality of January in a coastal city, cold that had teeth to it, skies the color of old concrete, mornings that required an act of will to move through. Logan's rib had healed to the point where he no longer thought about it unless he twisted suddenly, which he was learning not to do. The foundation work began in earnest in January. Not the public-facing structure, that was still months from launch, but the internal work of defining what it would actually do. Isabella convened a small working group. Logan, a specialist in deaf education named Dr. Renata Flores, a facilities planner, and a woman named Cora Kim, who had been deaf since childhood and was now an advocate with 2 decades of work behind her. The first meeting was in a conference room on the 39th floor, not the Pemberton suite. Isabella had, apparently deliberately, avoided the Pemberton suite for anything that wasn't strictly necessary since October. Logan was the last to arrive because the morning's freight elevator issue had run 7 minutes longer than expected, and he came in still in his work uniform, the dark shirt with the Crown Meridian Facilities patch on the sleeve, which he was aware looked a certain way in a room full of people in business clothes. Isabella looked up from the agenda she'd been reviewing and said, "You're late." Elevator. Which one? Freight, east side. The door sensor I've been fighting with for 2 months. It's resolved. She looked at him for a half second with something that was close to amusement. Sit down. He sat. Dr. Flores and Cora Kim had both been watching this exchange with the mild interest of people who were assembling information they hadn't been given directly. Cora Kim, who had been signing to Dr. Flores while Logan was finding his seat, paused and looked at Logan with a directness that was both professional and personal. "You're the father," she said. "Yes." "Owen." She said the name with the deliberateness of someone who knew it wasn't just a name in this context. "Isabella told me, I've worked with a lot of parents of deaf children, the ones who put in the work early, the language acquisition, the fluency. It makes a measurable difference by the time the kids are Owen's age." She paused. "Not enough parents put in the work." "It wasn't a sacrifice," Logan said. "It was just how we talked." Cora Kim looked at him steadily. "I know, that's what I mean." They spent 3 hours on the foundation's initial structure. The primary focus? Early intervention learning centers for deaf and hard-of-hearing children in lower-income communities, specifically targeting the age range from 0 to 5, when language acquisition was most critical, and when families without resources were most likely to fall through the gaps of existing support systems. Logan knew almost nothing about nonprofit structure or program design. He knew, in specific and granular detail, what it had actually been like to be a single father navigating the early years with a deaf child, which systems had worked, which had failed, what had been available, what hadn't, the 3-month wait list for the speech therapy clinic,
The sign language classes he'd found through a flyer on a community center bulletin board, the school that had an interpreter and the school before it that hadn't. He said all of this plainly, without organizing it into a presentation, and watched the room register it. Isabella was taking notes on a legal pad by hand, which he'd noticed she did in certain meetings. Not the ones where she was performing authority, but the ones where she was actually learning something. By the time they broke for lunch, the program outline looked substantively different from the version Isabella had presented at the start of the meeting. More concrete, more specific, the kind of different that happened when you moved from designing something in theory to designing it around what was actually true. Cora Kim caught Logan in the hallway during the break and said, "You should be doing this work full time." "I'm a maintenance supervisor." "I know what you are," she said. "I'm telling you what you could be." He thought about that during the elevator ride back down to the facilities office, where he had 40 minutes before the afternoon session. The working relationship between Logan and Isabella over the following 2 months was a thing neither of them named, because naming it would have required a conversation neither of them was quite ready for. And they were both, in different ways, people who preferred to understand something before they spoke about it. What it looked like from the outside, from Delia's vantage point, or Forsyth's, or Cora Kim's, was a working partnership that ran on a frequency slightly different from normal professional relationships. The shorthand that developed faster than it should have, the way they disagreed, which was directly and without the performance of diplomacy, and the way those disagreements usually produce something better than either starting position. The way Isabella asked Logan questions about Owen, not because it was polite, but because she was genuinely interested in the answers, and the way Logan had stopped editing the answers. There was a Wednesday in late February that Logan would return to later, as the moment when the thing between them shifted from something unspoken to something that both of them knew had to eventually be spoken. They were in the small conference room on 39, just the two of them, reviewing the first draft site plan for the Foundation's Pilot Learning Center. The architect had produced a beautiful document full of open spaces and natural light and equipment that cost more than Logan's annual salary per unit, and Logan had been going through it for 20 minutes with a pen he'd borrowed from Isabella's side of the table, noting the places where the design prioritized aesthetics over what a child with a hearing disability actually needed in a learning environment. He was halfway through explaining why the acoustic panels in the main learning space were positioned incorrectly when he became aware that Isabella had stopped looking at the plan. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression that was not the working session expression. It was the other one, the unguarded one, the one that appeared in increments and that he'd learned over months to recognize. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She looked back at the plan. "Keep going." "Isabella." She put her pen down. She was quiet for a moment, in the specific way of a person who has decided to say something and is choosing the first word carefully. "I had a conversation with my attorney last week," she said, "about the foundation, about the executive director position." A pause. "She asked me whether I'd offered the position to you yet." Logan was quiet. "I told her I hadn't. She asked why not." Isabella looked at the plan rather than at him. "I gave her 3 reasons that were all technically accurate and all somewhat beside the point." "What was the point?" She looked at him then. "That I've been avoiding it because offering you that position changes the nature of what this is." She said it with the directness she used when she'd stopped performing and was just saying the thing. "Right now you're someone I work with on a project. If you become the executive director of the foundation, you become someone I have a formal professional relationship with, which means the other thing has to be addressed or set aside." She held his gaze. "I don't want to set it aside." The room was quiet for a moment. The building hummed around them in its ordinary way. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he asked. "Since the doc, honestly, which I recognize is very fast." She paused. "I don't make decisions quickly. You might have noticed." "I've noticed. But I also don't talk myself out of things that are real because they're inconvenient." She looked at the plan again briefly, then back at him. "You're not easy to know. You don't perform, you don't explain yourself more than necessary, you answer questions with the minimum required words." She said it without criticism. "Most people read that as cold. I don't read it that way."
How do you read it? Careful, she said. You're very careful with what you say because you know it lands. Owen taught you that. A pause. Or maybe you already knew it, and Owen reinforced it. He looked at her for a long moment. The late afternoon light was coming through the conference room windows at a low angle, the specific flat light of a February afternoon, and outside the window the harbor was visible again as it always was from this side of the building, gray-blue and ordinary. He thought about the conversation he'd had with Owen that morning over breakfast. Owen had been quiet through most of it, which was unusual for breakfast. He was normally in a high communication mode in the morning, signing about whatever he was currently thinking about. Logan had asked, in sign, "What's going on?" Owen had signed back, "Is Ms. Vaughn your friend?" Logan had considered the question seriously, which Owen always noticed. "Yes." "Just a friend?" Logan hadn't answered immediately, which Owen had also noticed. Owen had signed, "It's okay if she's more. I just want to know." Logan had said, "I'm still figuring that out." Owen had looked at him with the particular patience of a child who had a clearer picture of something than the adult in the room and was choosing to be kind about it. "Okay," he signed. "Tell me when you figure it out." Sitting in the conference room with Isabella, Logan thought, there it is. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want you to know that going in. I was in a relationship for 4 years that ended because I'm not easy to be with. I'm in the building before 6 most mornings. I bring work home. I cancel things because of Owen's schedule without always managing to explain why in a way that doesn't feel like a deprioritization, even when it isn't." He paused. "I'm better at maintaining things than building them." She looked at him steadily. "You built a functioning life for yourself and your son from scratch, alone, starting when you were in your 20s and the circumstances were genuinely difficult. That is not a person who can't build things." "That's different." "Is it?" He didn't have an answer for that. "I'm not easy either," she said. "I work too much. I default to control when I'm uncomfortable. I have spent 4 years not trusting people fully because the last time I trusted someone fully, it turned out to be Victor." She said his name without flinching. "I have my own list." "I know." "So we have matching lists of problems." The corner of her mouth moved slightly. "That's not nothing." He looked at her for a moment. "Owen asked me about you this morning." She was still. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were just a friend." He paused. "I told him I was still figuring it out." "What did he say?" Logan almost smiled. "He said okay, told me to tell him when I figured it out." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her expression, that soft, complex thing that happened when something reached her without armor. "He's very patient for 8. He has more patience than both of us combined." She laughed at that. The full version, unexpected, and the sound of it in the quiet conference room was a very good sound. When it settled, they were both still looking at each other, and the thing between them was not unspoken anymore. It hadn't been named precisely, but it didn't need to be. Not yet. Some things were like the building. You didn't name the problem until you understood it, and you didn't understand it by rushing it. "The executive director position," Logan said. "Yes." "I need to think about it." "I know." "Not because I don't want it." He looked at the site plan. "Because if I take it, I want to be certain I'm doing it because it's the right job, and not because—" He stopped. "Because of me," she finished. "Yes." She nodded. "That's the correct reason to hesitate. I respect it." She pulled the site plan back toward her side of the table. "Think about it." They went back to the acoustic panels. Logan explained the correct positioning. Isabella made notes. The building held them both in its ordinary and different way, and outside the window the harbor was the color it always was in late winter, and neither of them said anything more about what had just been said, because it didn't need more. It needed time, and they were, both of them, people who understood the value of that. Logan took 3 days to think about the executive director position. On the first day, he made a list of reasons in his notebook. Not pros and cons, just the real reasons, the ones that were actually driving the hesitation. The list had 4 items. 2 were practical concerns about his qualifications and the transition from the only professional world he'd known. 1 was about Owen. Not whether Owen would be okay with the change, because Owen had made his position reasonably clear, but whether Logan was making the decision with his son's actual long-term interests at the center or his own emerging feelings pulling the wheel. The fourth was simpler and harder to write down, the fear that came with wanting something that mattered. On the second day, he talked to Delia, who was the person whose judgment he trusted most in his immediate life. She listened to all of it. Then she said, "The two practical concerns. Can they be resolved with time and learning?" "Yes." "The Owen concern."
Is it real? He thought about it. No, I checked it, and it's not real. It's cover. And the fourth one? He was quiet for a moment. That one's real. Delia looked at him with the expression she used when she was being patient with him about something he should already know. "Logan, you got onto a yacht in a harbor storm for a woman you'd met 45 minutes earlier because she needed help. The fourth concern is already answered. You've just been too inside your own head to see it." He sat with that. On the third day, he went home and told Owen. He sat across from his son at the kitchen table and signed the whole thing. The position, the foundation, what it would mean for his schedule, what it would mean for their life. He signed it carefully and completely, without abbreviating the important parts. Owen listened with his full attention. When Logan finished, Owen sat quietly for a moment, the way he did when he was processing something he wanted to answer correctly. Then he signed, "The kids in the foundation. Are they like me?" "Some of them, different kinds of hearing disabilities, but yes, some of them." Owen signed, "Are they going to have dads like you?" Logan looked at his son. "I hope so. That's partly the point. To make it easier for their families to be what they need." Owen considered this for a long moment. Then he signed with the particular clarity he used for things that mattered to him. "Then you should do it." Logan nodded. He looked at his son's face, the face he'd been reading for 8 years, the face he knew better than any face on earth, and felt the specific settling certainty of a decision that was right, not because it was without risk, but because it was true. He texted Isabella that evening, "I'm in." Her response came within a minute, which told him she'd been waiting. "Good. Board meeting Thursday to formalize. Bring the acoustic panel notes." He put his phone down and looked at the kitchen, at Owen's homework spread across the table, at the second coffee mug that had been sitting on the counter for the past 6 weeks, because he'd started making 2 cups every morning out of habit before realizing he only needed 1. He thought, things change. And then, more quietly, with the specific weight of someone who had spent a long time standing still, "That's allowed." He went to the counter and picked up his son's homework folder and set it on the table, and when Owen came back downstairs looking for it, Logan signed, "Right in front of you." Owen gave him the look. "I know where it was. I know you know." Owen smiled at him, the complete, unguarded version, and sat down, and Logan sat across from him, and the kitchen was warm against the February cold outside, and the ordinary evening continued in the way ordinary evenings did, carrying all the things it carried without announcing them, the way the best things usually arrived. Spring came late that year, the way it sometimes did on the coast, grudgingly, in increments, a week of warmth followed by a cold snap that sent everyone back into their coats. By the time April arrived with any conviction, the Owen Initiative had a physical address, a staff of 7, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony scheduled for the 14th, which was a Saturday, which had been Owen's specific suggestion when Isabella asked him what day would be best. She had asked him directly, which was something Logan had noticed and filed away. Not tell your dad to ask Owen, or what does Owen think filtered through Logan as intermediary, but a direct question signed across a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in March, when Isabella had come by to review the ceremony program and stayed for dinner, which had happened with increasing frequency over the past 2 months in a way that nobody formally acknowledged, but that had become, quietly, a fact of their week. Owen had considered the question seriously and signed, "Saturday? Because kids don't have school, and their parents don't have work, and everyone can actually come." Isabella had looked at Logan and signed back to Owen. Her signing was still developing, functional but careful, a beginner's vocabulary delivered with a beginner's concentration and none of a beginner's embarrassment. That's the smartest answer I've gotten from anyone on the planning committee. Owen had accepted this without false modesty,
which was one of the things Logan loved about him. He just nodded and signed, "I know." Logan had turned away to check something on the stove that didn't particularly need checking because his face was doing something he wasn't ready to explain. The weeks before the ceremony were the organized chaos of something that had been built carefully trying to function for the first time. Logan had been in the position of executive director for 6 weeks by then, which was long enough to understand what the job actually was, and short enough that he was still discovering its edges daily. It was not a job he was naturally suited to in every way. The administrative architecture, the grant reporting, the board communications, the public-facing language that translated what the foundation did into something that moved people to support it. These were skills he was learning in real time, sometimes badly, often with Cora Kim standing next to him, explaining where he'd gone wrong with the patience of a woman who had spent 20 years watching well-meaning people do this badly before doing it better. "You write like you talk," she told him in February, reviewing a donor communication he'd drafted. "That's good and bad. Good because it doesn't sound like a press release. Bad because it also doesn't sound like anyone should give you money. What's the difference? Talking is about what is. Fundraising is about what could be." She handed it back. "Write me the same information, but from the perspective of the parent who doesn't have what you had. The one who doesn't find the flyer on the bulletin board. Write to that parent." He rewrote it. She read it and said, "Better. Still rough, but better." Then, "Do it again." He did it again. This was, he was discovering, what building something actually required. The iteration that had no glamour to it, the quiet, unglamorous revision of things that weren't right yet in the direction of things that were more right. It was not so different from maintenance when he thought about it. The principle was the same. You looked at what was, you identified where it was failing, you adjusted, you watched to see if the adjustment held. The building work and the foundation work began to run in parallel in his mind as two versions of the same underlying problem. How do you keep something functioning for the people who depend on it? He was still on the Crown Meridian's payroll in a reduced capacity through the transition. Forsyth had arranged this with a pragmatism Logan appreciated, recognizing that pulling his building knowledge out entirely during the post-conspiracy stabilization period would have been counterproductive. He came in 2 mornings a week, and Marcus handled the rest, which was an adjustment for Marcus that had produced initial anxiety and then, visibly, something like confidence. Logan had watched this happen with the particular satisfaction of seeing a person step into space that had been made for them. Delia had said the first week of April, "You did a good thing letting Marcus take it." It was his job to take. You know what I mean. She handed him a coffee with the ease of someone who'd been doing it for years. Some people hold on to things because they're afraid of what happens if they let go. You let go because the building would be fine and you knew it. She looked at him. "How does it feel, the new thing?" He thought about it honestly. "Incomplete," he said. "Like I know what needs to happen, but I can't see the end of it yet. That's what building something feels like." She paused. "The maintenance job, you could see the end of everything. Fix the pipe, test the system, close the ticket, clear endpoints. Yes, this doesn't have that." "No," she nodded. "That's going to bother you for a while, then it won't." She said it with the certainty of someone who had outlasted their own discomfort with that particular truth. The work that doesn't end is usually the work that matters most. He carried that with him into the weeks before the ceremony. Victor Crane's sentencing happened on a Thursday in early April, 10 days before the ribbon cutting. Logan didn't attend. He'd given his deposition, submitted his documentation, done what the legal process required of him, and decided that sitting in a courtroom for the outcome served nothing useful for his own life. He read the coverage on his phone that evening, sitting on the front steps of his house while Owen was inside finishing homework. Crane received 6 years. Eastbrook and Pellman, who had cooperated, received reduced sentences that the coverage described as significant in the context of white-collar crime. Hargrove received 4 years, which the legal analysis pieces suggested was at the lower end of the range, given his partial cooperation. Logan read through the coverage once, put his phone in his pocket, and looked at the street for a while. He thought about Victor Crane standing on the deck of the Meridian Star in the rain, looking at Logan with the expression of a man encountering his first real inconvenience.
the tiredness in his voice when he'd said Isabella's name. A man who had spent 2 years building a careful mechanism for taking something that wasn't his and had failed because a maintenance worker he'd never noticed had noticed everything. He didn't feel satisfaction about the sentencing exactly. It was more like the feeling of closing a work order on a problem that had been on the list for too long, but not satisfaction, just the quiet of a thing resolved. He went inside and told Owen the case was over. Owen signed, "Is she okay?" He meant Isabella. Logan thought about the phone call she'd made that afternoon, her voice carrying the particular quality of a person processing something they'd known was coming, but that still landed with weight when it arrived.
She'd called him before she called anyone else, which he understood and which moved him. "She will be," Logan signed to Owen. Owen nodded and signed, "Good." Then, after a moment, "Dad?" "Yeah." "She smiles more when you're around." He said it with the matter-of-fact quality of someone reporting an observable fact. "I just thought you should know." Logan looked at his son. "I know." "Okay." Owen picked up his pencil and went back to his homework. Mission completed. Isabella came over that evening, which she hadn't planned to do and which Logan hadn't expected. She texted at 7:30. "Is it okay if I come by?" He texted back, "Doors open." She arrived at 8 after Owen was in bed, and she looked like she'd spent the day being professional and held together and was now in the first place where she didn't have to be either of those things. She sat at the kitchen table and Logan put a cup of tea in front of her without asking what she wanted and sat across from her. She wrapped both hands around the cup. 6 years, she said. I know. I know it's right. I know the evidence. I know the law. I know it's the correct outcome. She looked at the cup. It's still Victor. He was at my mother's funeral. He used to call me on my birthday before anyone else did, every year, even when we'd been fighting about company direction. She stopped. I keep thinking about the person he was and trying to reconcile that person with what he did, and they don't reconcile. They just sit next to each other and don't resolve. They don't have to resolve, Logan said. She looked up. People aren't consistent the way we want them to be, he said. He was genuinely those things. He was also genuinely what he did. Both are true and they don't cancel each other out. He paused. That's not easier, but it's more accurate. She looked at him for a moment. When did you figure that out? Owen's mother. It took about 3 years after she left before I stopped trying to make the person she was fit into the things she did. He turned his coffee cup. It doesn't fit. You just learn to hold both. She was quiet for a while, and Logan let the quiet be what it was. Not uncomfortable, not empty. The particular quality of two people who had gotten to the point where silence between them wasn't a gap that needed filling. She said, I called my mother's friend today, a woman named Helen who knew Victor for 30 years. She cried on the phone, and so did I. She paused. I haven't cried in front of many people. Usually I wait until I'm alone. I know. You've seen me cry. Twice, he said. Both times you kept talking through it. She made a short sound that was almost a laugh. That seems about right. She looked at him across the table. Logan? Yeah. I want to stop moving around the thing. She said it with the directness that he'd come to understand was her most honest register. Not the corporate directness, which was precision, but the personal directness, which was courage. We've been careful about it for months, both of us. And I understand why we were careful. The professional structure, the timing, wanting to be sure. She held his gaze. I'm sure. He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet around them, the way it was always quiet at this hour. Owen asleep upstairs, the house making its small settling sounds, the street outside empty. I'm not easy, he said, because he'd said it before and it was still true, and he needed her to have it again. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. Logan, she set the cup down. You are the person who learned a language from scratch for his child. You are the person who spent 11 hours in a building pulling a conspiracy apart thread by thread because a woman signed a word at you in a reflection. You are the person who turned down 3 media interviews because the story wasn't yours to tell. She paused. The things you call being not easy are the things I've been looking for. She stopped. I've been looking for someone who does the right thing when nobody's watching,
I didn't expect to find him in a maintenance corridor. He was quiet. Say something, she said. I'm thinking. Think faster. He looked at her, at the tiredness and the realness of her, at the person behind the CEO register and the careful professional architecture, the woman who'd had a fire extinguisher in her hands on a pitching deck in a harbor storm, who'd asked his 8-year-old son what day to hold a ceremony, who'd cried on the phone with her mother's friend and then come to his kitchen table. I'm in, he said, which was what he'd texted about the foundation, and which meant the same thing now, and which he was aware was not a romantic declaration by any conventional measure, and which was also exactly right. She knew it was right, too. He could see that in her face. That's it, she said. That's all I get? For now. She looked at him. You are incredibly frustrating. I know. I mean that affectionately. I know that, too. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, briefly. Just that, just the gesture, simple and direct and without performance. Then she picked up her cup and they sat in the kitchen for another hour, talking about the ceremony and the foundation and the acoustic panel changes that the architect had finally, reluctantly, accepted, and at no point did either of them feel the need to make the evening more than what it was, which was two people who had found their way to the same table and were in no hurry to leave it. The morning of April 14th arrived clear and cold, and then, by 10 o'clock, warm enough that people left their coats in their cars. The Owen Initiative Learning Center occupied a converted building in a neighborhood 12 minutes from the Crown Meridian, a neighborhood where the families who needed it most could reach it without crossing the city, which had been Logan's first and most insistent requirement in the site selection process. The exterior had been repainted. The interior had been rebuilt with the acoustic specifications Logan had fought for. The correct panel placement, the lighting that didn't produce glare on signing space, the layout that Dr. Flores had designed based on 2 decades of research, and Cora Kim had refined based on 2 decades of living. The parking lot was full by 10:15. More people had come than the planning committee had projected, which was the kind of problem Logan was happy to have. Families were spread across the outdoor space. Parents and children, some of the children in cochlear implant processors, some not, all of them in the general chaos of a public event that had significantly more children than most public events. Logan stood near the building entrance watching it and thought, this is what it looks like. Not the website rendering, not the program document. The actual thing in the actual sun with actual people in it. Owen was somewhere in the crowd with Marcus's daughter, who was 9, and whom Owen had decided was acceptable company, which was a meaningful endorsement given Owen's social selectivity. Logan had seen them near the refreshment table 20 minutes ago and had received a wave from Owen that meant, I know where you are and I'm fine. Cora Kim appeared at his elbow. She looked at the crowd with the expression of someone who had been working towards something for a long time and was now seeing it exist. You should feel good about this, she said. I feel terrified, he said. And good. Both. That's the correct feeling, she paused. The Hendricks family is here. The one from the early outreach. The daughter who's 18 months. They drove 45 minutes. He looked out at the crowd. Which one? She pointed. A young couple near the edge of the gathering, a woman holding a toddler who was pulling at her earring with the single-minded focus of a small person who had decided that earring was the most important thing in the world. The couple had the look he recognized. Not from photographs or case studies, but from memory, from his own past, from the specific combination of exhaustion and ferocious love that was the particular expression of parents of a very young deaf child who hadn't yet figured out what the path was, but were determined to find it. He'd been that person. In the parking lot with the dropped signing dictionary, in the school meeting that hadn't gone well, in the mornings before he was fluent, signing badly and trying again. He looked at them for a moment. Then he walked over. He introduced himself without the title, just his name. He signed hello to the baby, who stared at his hands with the pure attention of a small person for whom hands were still full of information. The parents looked at him, and he could see the recognition settle on them. The face from the news coverage, the maintenance worker, which was also now the executive director, which was also, most relevantly, the father of an 8-year-old deaf kid who was somewhere in this crowd making friends with Marcus's daughter. The mother said, She's 18 months. We just got the diagnosis confirmed 6 weeks ago. What's her name? Clara. He looked at Clara, who had moved from the earring to a more general study of his face. He signed her name to her, C-L-A-R-A, finger spelled slowly, clearly. She watched his hands. Something in her expression shifted, marginally, in the way very young children registered something new. The mother's eyes went bright. "That's the first time anyone signed her name to her," she said. Her voice was steady, but her face wasn't. "The doctors, the audiologists, they're not always trained in it," Logan said. "That's part of what this place is for." He paused. "She's going to be fine. I know that's not useful yet because it doesn't feel true yet, but it's true." The father looked at him. "Your son, he's somewhere near the food table with a 9-year-old arguing about something. He's fine." Logan smiled. "He's better than fine." He talked with them for 10 minutes. Practical things, the enrollment process, what the first sessions looked like, who to call with questions. By the time he moved on, the mother had taken out her phone to photograph the building sign, and the father was holding Clara with a particular tightness of someone who had just been given, without ceremony, a version of the future they hadn't been able to see clearly before. Logan moved through the crowd and found Isabella near the temporary stage where the ceremony was going to happen. She was talking to a board member, but she tracked Logan's approach from the corner of her eye. She'd gotten good at that, at knowing where he was in a room without appearing to watch for him. She finished the conversation and turned. "You talked to the Hendricks family," she said. Not a question. She'd been watching. "Yes." "How were they?" "How I was," he said. 8 years ago." She looked at him for a moment, then at the crowd. "This is going to be harder than I thought," she said quietly. "What is?" "Not crying at a ceremony I'm supposed to be running professionally." She pressed her lips together briefly. "I was fine until I saw you with the baby." He looked at her. "You're allowed to cry." "I'm the CEO." "You're also a person." He paused. "Those things can be true at the same time." She looked sideways at him with an expression that was simultaneously exasperated and fond, which had become, over the months, one of his favorite expressions of hers. "You've been spending too much time with Cora." "She's very wise." "She's very blunt." "Same thing." The ceremony started at 11. Isabella spoke first, which was correct and appropriate. And she was precise and warm and professional and managed, Logan noted, to get through the full speech without the cry she'd been worried about, which he attributed to the specific discipline of someone who had learned to hold the line at necessary moments. She talked about the company's commitment, about the research basis for early intervention, about what the foundation intended to build over the next 5 years. She did not make it about the October events, which she'd told Logan she wouldn't and which he'd trusted her not to. Cora Kim spoke second and was, as she always was, better than everyone expected. Dr. Flores spoke third about the clinical framework. Logan spoke fourth, which he'd resisted and then accepted because Cora had told him, "The parents in that crowd need to hear from the father, not the executive director. Say that, just say that." He stood at the microphone and looked at the crowd, the parents and children and staff and board members, and the Hendricks family near the left side with Clara, who was currently asleep against her father's chest. He said, "My son is 8. His name is Owen, and this place is named for him," which he accepted with the specific dignity of someone who thought it was appropriate and didn't need to say so. A few laughs. "When Owen was very young, I learned sign language from a library book and a YouTube channel because there wasn't a resource like this near where we lived. I was bad at it for a long time." He paused. "I'm telling you this not because it has a neat ending where I got better and everything became easy. It doesn't. There are still hard days. There are days when I sign something wrong and my 8-year-old corrects me, which is not a comfortable experience." More laughter, including Owen's, visible near the refreshment table. "What I'm telling you is, the learning is the thing. Every word you learn, every sign, every adaptation, it's not a workaround. It's the real language of your family. And a place like this exists so that no parent has to learn it alone from a library book anymore." He stepped back from the microphone. The applause was genuine in the way that applause from people who were there because it meant something to them was always genuine. Not polite, not performative, but the sound of people recognizing something true.
Isabella, standing to his left, didn't say anything. She put her hand briefly at the small of his back, just that, just a moment, and then stepped forward to cut the ribbon. Owen found Logan afterward, working through the crowd with the efficiency of a child who knew how to navigate spaces where he had to read rather than hear. He stopped in front of Logan and signed, "That was good." "You're biased, obviously." He paused, looking past Logan toward where Isabella was talking to the Hendricks family, bending slightly to look at Clara, signing something simple and careful to the baby, who watched her hands with the same focused attention she'd given Logan's. "She's learning faster than you did." "I know." "She practiced. I've heard her in the car." He paused. "When she thinks no one can hear her." He made a face that communicated he found this interesting information. She was signing the alphabet in order over and over. Logan watched Isabella with the Hendricks family, watched her sign Clara's name to the baby. The same thing he'd done, the same letters, slowly and clearly. Watched Clara's attention snap to her hands. "You're very observant," Logan signed. "I know. It's a useful quality." Owen considered his father for a moment, with the unhurried attention he applied to things that interested him. Then he signed, "Dad, when are you going to ask her?" Logan looked at his son. "Don't look at me like that," Owen signed. "I've watched you both for 6 months. I'm 8, not stupid." "I know you're not stupid." "So when?" Logan looked back at Isabella, who had straightened from the baby and was laughing at something the mother had said, genuinely laughing, caught off guard by it. "When it's time," he signed to Owen. Owen gave him the look. The specific one. Then he signed, "You know what your problem is? I'm sure you're going to tell me. You wait until you understand everything before you move. But some things you only understand after you move." Logan looked at his son for a long moment, 8 years old, standing in the October sun. April sun, Logan corrected himself. April, the ceremony he'd helped build for the place, named for this kid, with the patient expression of someone who had more clarity than the adults around him and was trying to be kind about it. "When did you get so smart?" Logan signed. "I've always been this smart," Owen signed back. "You've been too worried about me to notice." That one landed the way Owen's true statements always landed, not harshly, but accurately, in the specific place that accuracy reached. Logan looked at his son. He thought about 8 years of mornings, of the library book and the YouTube channel, of the copper fitting and the maintenance corridor and the glass wall reflection and a woman with a fire extinguisher on a yacht deck in a harbor storm. He thought about the parking lot with the dropped dictionary and the kitchen table with the folder that said Owen Initiative and Clara Hendricks asleep against her father's chest. He thought about 2 cups of coffee made from habit, an event whistle that needed fixing, and a work order always waiting. He thought, some things you only understand after you move. He crossed the gathering toward Isabella. She saw him coming to you. She always saw him coming, had learned his specific quality of movement through months of the same rooms. And she finished the conversation she was in and turned. "What?" she said. She could read his face now. That had taken about 4 months. "I'm done being careful," he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression. The armor that was always partially there, that she'd never fully taken off in the years it had taken her to learn that some people were worth the risk of it. And then it shifted further than he'd seen it shift before. "Okay," she said, "just that. I mean, I'm going to keep being careful about the work, and Owen's schedule, and the things that require care." He stopped because he was explaining when he didn't need to. "I just mean, with this, I'm done waiting to understand it before I say it." Logan. "Yeah, I know what you mean." She looked at him steadily. "I've known what you meant for about 3 months. Then why didn't you?" "Because you needed to get there yourself." She paused. "And because I'm not easy either, and because I wanted to be certain that when you said it, it was because you were ready and not because I'd maneuvered you into it." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a lot of thinking." "I do a lot of thinking." "I know." He paused. "So do I." "I know you do." Her voice was quieter now. "That's one of the things." "One of the things," he repeated. "There's a list." She looked at him with the directness that was her most honest self. "It's a long list," He reached out and took her hand, which was a simple thing, and also not simple at all. The way the things that mattered were never entirely one or the other. She let him. She held on. Around them, the ceremony had dissolved into the general warmth of a gathering that had done what it came to do. Families talking, children running in the newly opened spaces of a building that now existed in the world, the staff who'd built it moving through it with the specific satisfaction of people inside a thing they'd made. The sun was doing what April sun did when it finally arrived, warm and direct, and without the hedging quality of March. Owen was somewhere to their left, and Logan knew this without looking because he always knew where Owen was, the way you knew the locations of the things that mattered most. He would find out later that Owen, at that exact moment, had turned to Marcus's daughter and signed, "Finally." And Marcus's daughter, who didn't know sign language, had looked at him blankly. And Owen, who had spent his whole life communicating across exactly that kind of gap, had just smiled and pointed. Well, the trial concluded in June. Victor Crane began his sentence. The Vaughn Hospitality Group's restructured board held its first fully operational meeting in May, with a new composition that Forsyth had described as the cleanest the company had seen in years. The Crown Meridian continued to function, correctly, efficiently, under Marcus's capable management. And Logan came in Tuesday mornings not because he was needed, but because he liked the building, and the building, in some uncomplicated way, liked him back. The Owen Initiative enrolled its first 42 families in the spring cohort. The Hendricks family was among them. Clara, by June, had learned 6 signs. Her mother had learned 40. Logan got a text from Clara's mother on a Wednesday in June. She signed Mama today. First word. I don't know if you know what that means to us, but I wanted someone who would understand to know. He read it twice. Then he showed it to Owen, who read it and signed, That's good. Then, after a moment, That's really good. Logan sent back, I know exactly what it means. Congratulations to all 3 of you. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to the meeting he'd stepped out of, which was a grant review with Cora Kim and Dr. Flores and a foundation officer from a national disability advocacy group who had reached out in April and was now discussing a partnership that would, if it came through, allow the Owen Initiative to open a second location within 18 months. The meeting ran long. Cora made 4 points that changed the direction of the conversation. Logan took notes and asked 3 questions and let the people in the room who knew more than him do the work they knew how to do, which was a skill he'd been developing. The one where you understood your own limits and trusted the people around them. Afterward, in the parking lot, Cora said, Second location, you ready for that? No, he said. I'll get there. She nodded. Good answer. The wedding was in October. A year, almost to the day, from the afternoon Isabella had walked into the Crown Meridian's lobby, and Logan had been standing near the concierge desk reviewing a punch list. It was small. 60 people, the private event space at a vineyard 40 minutes from the city, afternoon light through high windows, the specific quality of an October day that had decided, against the odds, to be beautiful. Owen wore a suit that he had opinions about, specifically strong opinions regarding the tie, which he'd agreed to on the condition that he could remove it after the ceremony, which was accepted. He served as best man with the seriousness he applied to things that mattered to him and the specific composure of a 9-year-old who knew he was the most important person at this event and was trying not to be too obvious about knowing it. He had written a speech, which Logan had not known about until Owen showed it to him the morning of. It was short, 4 sentences, handwritten in Owen's careful print, planned to be signed and simultaneously interpreted by Cora Kim, who had agreed to do this when Owen asked her directly, and who had told Logan afterward that she wasn't going to be responsible for what happened to her face during the interpretation. The 4 sentences were, My dad is the best person I know. He taught me that love is something you do, not something you feel. He found someone who does it too. That's the whole thing. Logan, reading it, had had to take a moment. He'd signed to Owen. That's good. I know, Owen signed back, without smugness, just accuracy. Don't cry yet. Save it. Logan saved it until the ceremony, which turned out to be the right call. Delia was there, in the 3rd row, and she cried without any of Isabella's professional composure about it,
which was its own gift. Marcus was there with his daughter, who had spent 6 months learning basic sign language after the ribbon cutting, and who greeted Owen by signing hello, best man, which made Owen look at her with an upgraded level of respect. Cora Kim stood to the side during Owen's speech and signed it into the air with the clean efficiency of a woman who had spent 20 years giving deaf children language, and her face, as she'd warned, did not remain neutral, and she made no particular effort to make it. The interpreter and the 9-year-old and the 42 families and the meeting that had run long and the Tuesday morning building checks and the copper fitting and the second coffee cup on the counters, all of it was in that room. In the way that everything that leads to a moment is somehow present in the moment, even if you can't see all of it. Logan and Isabella stood facing each other in the October light. He thought about the glass wall, the reflection.
A woman with 3 seconds and a single word. He thought about how the most important moments in a life were rarely the large dramatic ones, but the small, exact ones. A hand raised in a corridor, a child pouring orange juice, a text sent after 9 p.m., a first word signed by a baby named Clara. He thought about what Owen had said in the parking lot of this exact event space 2 weeks earlier, when they'd come to confirm the venue details, and Owen had stood in the empty room and turned in a slow circle and signed, "This is the right place." Logan had asked, "How do you know?" Owen had considered it seriously, looking at the windows, the light, the proportions of the room. Then he'd signed, "Because it doesn't try too hard. It's just what it is." Which was, Logan thought, the right standard for most things. Isabella was looking at him now, the way she'd looked at him in the 41st floor corridor in November, from the other side of a glass, clearly without intermediary. Except that there was no glass now, and she wasn't asking for anything. She was just looking at him, and he was looking at her, and the distance between them was exactly 0. He thought, "This is the right place. They said what needed to be said." Outside, October was doing what October did. Cooling toward the evening, the light going amber and long, the world preparing for the quiet season without any particular drama about it. And inside the room, 60 people who had come, because it mattered to them, witnessed 2 imperfect, careful, fully alive people choosing each other in the plain and serious way that meant they understood what they were choosing. Owen, watching from the front row, signed something to the empty air beside him. Not to anyone in particular, just a statement made because it was true and he wanted to say it. Finally, he signed and smiled. Some things you only understand after you move. Some distances can only be crossed by someone who isn't afraid of what they might find on the other side. And some of the most important words ever spoken between 2 people were never spoken at all. They were shaped in the air with careful hands by a woman who had 3 seconds and used them, and a man who had spent 8 years learning how to listen. That was the whole thing.